Hey everybody, what's going on? Dace here, and today I have a very special video for you all. I am here with Chris Ekins, the creator of Risk System. Some of you will recall that I was checking that out. If you watched I think I did a review, in-depth review, and then I did some all clear kind of stuff where I go through the whole game. And this is something we've been wanting to do for a little while, so I'm really excited to be able to actually do this today. So, Chris, how are you doing today?
Doing pretty good. Real glad to be having this chat.
Yeah, awesome. So, I think some of the first things that I would love to just jump into would be how you got into developing games. If you can just shed a little light on maybe some of your inspirations or just what kind of led you to that path.
So, way back when I was little, Sonic the Hedgehog happened, which was a big moment for me. So I got like that back then. I used to just like draw Sonic levels on pieces of paper. And on the
Nice.
back sides of the paper, I would add like obstacles. So when you'd hold up to the light, you could see the obstacles that would like come up, like spikes and whatever. So I'd like have my friends like draw a path through the level, and then like, oh look, you hit the obstacle, because that was game design in 1992 for a
Yeah.
elementary school student. But from there it was just, yeah, I played a lot of like Shinobi 3, Golden Axe, Thunder Force 2 stuff on my
Nice.
Genesis back in the day. And eventually, it was just like a thing where I was coming at it from the art direction first, and I was like, oh, I want to make art for games. And eventually, I'm like, I don't think that's realistic. Like, I don't think people are just going to let me make art for stuff. So I think I need to learn how to make games so I can put my art in them.
Yeah.
So, and then like, the first thing I think I was trying to do was like way, way too big, because like, when you're a kid, you don't really know what you're doing at all. So you're like, oh, I want to make a game like Phantasy Star Online.
Yeah.
And then that was like Fantasy Star was a big deal for me. So I kept eventually figuring out like I need to like scale that idea down. But I was playing Burnout 3. I think that's the one that's Burnout Takedown, has a lot of like pop punk music on the soundtrack. Like that was like, oh man, this is so cool. And they had this like the risk and reward system in that game was like you would get speed boosts for getting into like near crashes or like causing your opponents to crash. I'm like,
Hmm.
oh, wouldn't that be like such a cool thing, like in a shooter, like to like motivate you to like put yourself in harm's way. And then like Crazy Taxi also like reinforced that idea, like how your tips would increase before you like when you'd go in between stuff. And like I always thought
Yeah.
that was like so cool. Like, oh yeah, like just force them to do the fun thing,
Yeah.
because
And yeah,
it'd been, yeah, I like been into shmups and stuff. And like one of the things where I was always a little, I guess, sort of bummed on is like a lot of like things like I really liked like the Raiden games and stuff like
mhm.
that too. But like some of the ways that you would like say be motivated for score were like not super fun. Where you'd be like, all right,
Yeah,
run out the
totally.
clock.
Yeah.
You're like, cool. Like I feel like this is just the incorrect way to play this game, but the score is technically motivating me to do this.
Yeah. Yeah, that's really interesting. So in particular, and maybe what you just finished off with there even ties in somewhat to what inspired you to do Risk Systems specifically. Uh, like obviously you must have had some sort of interest in shmups or arcade style games uh, to kind of take on a creation like that. But maybe you want to share a little about what kind of got you feeling things out in that direction specifically.
Um, I think it was like like playing through Ikaruga again and
Hmm.
being like, oh man, yes,
Yeah.
and I was thinking like, I think I could do this. And so I think it was like 2010 or 2011 was when I was really like, okay, I'm gonna like learn to code so I can like start this. And I, came up with the earliest version of the game, which was overhead and way too many features, I would say.
Nice.
You actually had a limited amount of shots you could take, so in order to shoot at all, you needed to buzz enemy fire.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
That sounds
And
wicked.
yeah, it was like the thing was like it was it was pretty cool, and like but it was going to be just so off-putting because there was a bunch of like
Hmm.
another thing that I really wanted to like because I was really influenced so much by like these racing games is like I wanted to make it that the ship felt like a ship
Yeah.
instead of it being just like a sort of zero inertia sort of thing because I was like yeah like I really like because it's cool to feel a sense of like mastery
Hmm.
over movement
Definitely.
and usually if the movement doesn't give you sort of anything to master like that's just one less thing you have to like sort of build up your skill on but like I have to say that the inertia in that version was just way overboard like it was like you had to really it felt like you more like you were steering like a boat than like anything like it was crazy um yeah so eventually that like I put out a little demo and some people played it and I was like oh this is cool but like I wasn't really seeing what like it didn't fully click at the time where I'm like I'm not sure like where this goes past the demo like I didn't have a super clear vision of it
Hmm.
which I started to have in like 2016 2017.
Okay.
So then it was like then I sort of changed it around and started like there were still a lot of features in the original. Like you could probably find footage of the early versions of the side-scrolling risk system, um, which used to have like alt fire modes and stuff, but like eventually I was whittling more of it away until it's like, okay, no, like the point is the movement, and yeah, that was like the thing was when it finally was like, oh yeah, like don't focus on all of don't just have the tropes that you would normally have because it's this genre. Just like only do the things that reinforce the core idea.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. It's funny because when I think it was maybe on the Nintendo website, reading the game description, or maybe somewhere else. I don't recall, but I recall seeing one of the little points that was mentioned, something like, "Oh, feel like an ace pilot," or something to that effect. And I remember thinking at first, like, "Oh yeah, right. Like, what am I gonna feel when I'm just flying in this game like any other shmup?" But then when I got into it, it was just like, "Oh my god, I actually do feel like an ace pilot." Like, what? It was just crazy. And so it's just wild to see how, like, when I play games typically, like, yeah, you can feel a certain something like your proficiency when you're, let's say, doing grazing or just other maneuver related things, but it's more so like the thing that's happening, not so much the movement, the moving around. But in Risk System is just it's just a whole other experience, and that's something that just blew my mind. Just how incredible it felt to actually maneuver and just rip across waves of enemies with your barrel rolls and stuff like that. So that was just amazing to experience.
Cool. That feels nice to hear. Thank you.
Yeah.
It's great when people it is interesting because like a lot of the most of the input I got was like from in-person events like Midwest Gaming Classic and like
Hmm.
Anime Central. So like
Sure.
people would like walk by and play and like there'd be there was like a sort of like a segment where like above a certain age and below a certain age like totally got it
Yeah.
and they were like oh yeah they were there for it but then there was this like sweet spot of an age where there'd be people that would be sort of like resistant to
Hmm.
the idea
For sure. Yeah.
so like and it was yeah it was weird because like there were people that would understand like what was going on like with Boss 2 there's some people who would get extremely frustrated by it. Now,
Hmm.
and I'd be like, no, like believe in yourself, you can do it.
Yeah.
And like, yeah, I think I sounded like the little before boss battle messages in Radiant Silvergun. Like, be an attitude for gains. But it was like, kids would sort of like see a giant robot spider and they would like make this connection to like, oh, webs, like blah blah, and like they would just sort of understand it conceptually.
Hmm.
And then like older like seasoned shmup people would sort of like appreciate it, but then like the people in like the like 20 something to like 25 range that might have been hardcore shmup players had the hardest time with it,
Yeah,
which was interesting.
yeah, I can see that. I know I struggled with certain parts in stage 2, and I think we even when I did my planned bomb video for like new players, just I think you commented something about how you had to do things to get people to realize that they actually have to play a certain way and make use of their abilities. They can't just treat it like any old shmup. And I know when I first started playing it, I I found the auto fire very strange. I didn't understand that at first, but after playing the game more and more, it just made so much sense that of course you would not manually control the firing. Like that would just ruin part of the experience. Like obviously, I think in the settings you can switch that, but to me that would just take something away from what was created, and I just think it's perfect the way you wrapped everything together. It's just amazing.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's cool to, I understand the like the polarizing nature of the game.
Hmm. Yeah.
But like it's great when I had watched your video and there was just all this stuff that you'd picked up on, and I was just like so like happy to hear it. Like, oh yeah, like it was, I put it there so it could be observed, and it's just so nice like seeing or like hearing it be observed.
Yeah, for sure.
And just like, yeah, it was there was a lot of like back and forth with people to try to sort of figure out like how do I get people to like play a little bit less like I guess conservatively,
Hmm.
because there's people that would like save up their barrier breaker for like an entire stage, and I was like, no, like I want to, like, how do I encourage them to just like use it all the time? Like you
Yeah.
can get as many, get as many bombs as you need, like don't worry about it, like just keep going, like you can do it.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was just trying to like, how can I be a cheerleader for the player?
Yeah.
um so it was,
I
yeah, I think the background enemies were one of the things that was sort of implemented in order to really just try to get people like to like wonder like how do I hit those, just to like get them to see like, oh, I can get bombs pretty fast, you
mhm.
know.
Yeah. That's something that really stood out for me is just how there are just certain parts. I think specifically in the boss fights, uh, like obviously during the stage portions, you will have enemies in the background, like you said, which target you and stuff like that. But I think in the boss fights specifically, that's where it really shines. Like you need to manage your resources in such a way, uh, because sometimes there will just be those attacks where if you don't have anything ready to fire off, you aren't going to make it through something you need to avoid. So you cannot treat it like a normal shmup where you're trying to go for like a no bomb, no miss. Like you have to use these things in order to survive. I think the best example would be the true last boss, just with how insane that fight is. Like you have to know when to charge super super fast so that you have something to survive your way through the next attack or whatever the case is. It's just I love it. So
Oh man.
so I suppose I could probably just dig into. Well, we did touch on some of the earliest ideas already. Um, I suppose I'm kind of curious. Was there a reason you wanted to do something so far removed from just the traditional experience?
Well, like the funny thing was like I didn't realize how far removed it was for a
Yeah.
little bit. Like I was like, oh yeah, like this is a I don't know, maybe I can sort of think of it like, I don't know if you're necessarily like a Sonic fan or anything, but like when Sonic Mania came out, one of the things that I had sort of heard some people saying about it was like, oh, like this game is how you remember Sonic. like this is a game like it's not exactly like the old games. It's a game that's like made like how you know nostalgically think of it. So
Hmm.
it was like, oh, it's like the best of the classic Sonic games, but it's like it's at a level that it never had actually like reached, and it took things
Yeah.
that you were like, so like I I was viewing it as like sort of like, okay, well, what is a shmup? I'm like, well, like the purpose is like you want to be in like you're in a fighter jet, like you want to feel like you're piloting something. So I was just taking it as like the genre as like what is the intent of the genre versus like what's necessarily like the um like I guess rules maybe.
Hmm. Yep.
But I was like thinking of it like, oh yeah, like this is like a shmup, but in my mind I was like, oh, but this is like a really basic shmup. Like this is super basic. It was what the way that I sort of thought of it was that I was just like making something that was like very recognizably the genre, but and there were things that I like when I first was making it that I was throwing in just because I was so used to them being there, like the alternate fire modes and things like that, where I was like, oh yeah, yeah, this is a thing that happens in a shmup, so like why would like that has to be there, right?
Yeah.
And it took me a minute to realize that those like extra things were actually like getting in the way of the main idea, like because there was like a beam shot, a spread shot, and then those used your meter. Then there was also the barrier breaker, and then your regular shot didn't use meter, but like when you were firing it, it lessened the amount of energy you could like buzz off of shots.
Hmm.
And like I was watching, you know, people play, and I was like, oh man, they're just kind of playing it like they're just like finding spots to sit in, and then they'd like use their spread shot to just, you know, try to sort of paint the screen a certain way, but they weren't
Hmm.
really moving very much. And I'm like, oh, I don't want that. So I was like, how do I make sure they move? And it was like, oh, well, like they should just like there should just be one type of shot that isn't all encompassing, and the only thing that makes it get, you know, wider is how fast you're moving. And he's like, oh, okay, like yeah, that'll do
Love
it.
it.
And it was like a thing where, you know, again, I wasn't trying to be, and it's hard not to come off as like sounding like snobbish because I wasn't trying to be like, I'm gonna deconstruct shmups. So
Yeah.
it was just like I was really just earnestly like, I just really want to make a good one. Like that's all I want. And
Hmm.
I didn't think like I didn't realize some of the decisions I was making might have been controversial. And I was, like like there was one like I almost don't even want to bring it up, but there was this one time where it was like, back when the game was on itch, that someone had like you know they took the time to give me like a feedback document. Like it wasn't something I was expecting at all. Like they just messaged me or they did something like on Twitter, and they like sent me a Google Doc of all their thoughts on the demo. And I was like, wow, like this is really thorough. Thanks. And I'm like reading through it, and there was a one part when they were talking about the inertia, but they were saying like, oh, I think there might be a delay on the inputs. And I was like, oh no, no, it's not a delay. It's that there's inertia. Like your inputs are immediately read. It's just that it like as you're adding speed to your ship, like against its weight, like it just takes a little bit to get going. Cause
Hmm.
and then the conversation's tone immediately shifted to they're like, well, no self like they said like no self-respecting shmup will ever have inertia. I was like I was like, wait, what? And I'm like, oh no, I'm like, that's just part of the game. Like that's just like the rules. Like that's one of the things that's different. Like it's not like it wasn't like I accidentally went and programmed this complex motion system. Like it would have been easier for me to not have inertia. But it was just but I'd made this person very upset, and I was trying to be as cordial as possible. I'm like, no, really, it's not like a mistake. But they definitely
Man.
were.
Yeah, I think some people they just go in with expectations, and I feel that can pretty much always just land you in disappointment because you're going in thinking like, oh, okay, I know something about what this is going to be like based on other things that I'm assuming this is going to be like, and then it's just when it's a completely different experience, guess what? You're going to feel let down because it's not what you thought. So for me, when I jumped into the game, uh, my buddy Lord Shmup had done a short YouTube video, and it was the first time ever hearing about this. And I went to the eShop right away and grabbed it because I knew I was going to love it. It just looked incredible. And yeah, the rest is history. So, yeah.
Yeah, I'm glad. Like, it's nice seeing like people that like really, someone like you who really appreciates like shmups and stuff. That like you're able to like do that. Like there's a lot of there was at a convention like a squad of these guys a little older than myself who were just super into shmups, and they saw it, and this one guy was like, "Oh, this kind of reminds me of Crimson Clover," like because like, but he was like sort of citing like the distance you are from the enemies and stuff, like in that game how you get like a little like an attack boost from like proximity.
Mm-hmm.
And like this dude had clearly been playing for long enough that like I guess when you play enough of them you're open to the new things because you're
Yep.
like, oh, I've already played a billion of the ones that are like the other ones, and so this is novel to me. And
Totally.
so it was like, so again, it was that sort of sweet spot where you're like, if you were a veteran but above a certain age, like, you got it. And then if you were
Mm-hmm.
like not familiar with shmups, like there are people who are like, oh, I'm never good at these games, and they were playing it, and they would just like, it would be on the one of the TVs for like 3 hours. I'm like, you sure you want to maybe go see the rest of the convention? And it would just like be, it'd be super cool. They're like, oh, I didn't think I could like this type of game, and I was like, oh man, yay.
Yeah, that's so great. So, in terms of the overall project of making Risk System, what was the greatest challenge? Like we talked about just kind of things you had to do to get people to be aware that they actually need to use their resources. But in terms of like your personal struggles, was there any one major thing that was just a big hurdle to get over?
So there's like I think I'll go with like the more boring thing first. There's certain technical aspects for like integration with different platforms.
Mm-hmm.
Like right now there's an issue that we haven't actually been able to fix on the Xbox version of the game because there's like an achievement for all S rank run,
Mm-hmm.
and it used to work like when we were originally testing it, like so it was like back end stuff, and
Yeah.
it's really frustrating because like I think that the problem is actually not on our end at this point, but like there's people who are upset because like they can't, like they've earned the achievement but the achievement isn't like loading, so they don't have like a full achievement list for the game.
Yeah.
So I was just like, that's frustrating because like you can reach out, and but it's like hard to be like, hey, I don't know, Xbox, like there might be something going wrong here because like when we test this locally, like we can get the flag for the achievement to come up. So like that kind of back end stuff,
Mm-hmm.
like that stuff is probably the most frustrating. So that's like the boring part, I guess.
Yeah.
But then the other part was I wanted to make it that the game felt pretty organic, like in the sense that like I like the idea that like your real world experience to some effect can prepare you for what's going to happen. So like that was part of the idea of the inertia as well, is that like, well, that's something you expect. Like if you've ever driven a car or ridden a bike or like been on a skateboard, like you know what inertia is.
Yeah.
like you have some idea of like, hey, like mass has
Mm-hmm.
properties. And like so I wanted like things to sort of inform ideas, like again like the design of like the spider like boss for stage 2, like having its behavior and movement, like designing the stage, like how would something like this be a threat to Elisa's ship.
Yeah.
So like if there was like a sort of a combination of like narrative and design elements meant to sort of bolster that gameplay experience. Like
Mm-hmm.
Volsh's original design used to actually be this gigantic Gundam like mech.
Okay.
But the fight, like even though it was pretty cool, like it didn't feel like it made a ton of sense. Like
Mm-hmm.
it was like this giant thing should not be able to move that anywhere near the speed of Elisa's ship.
Yeah.
And there was this thing that just like bothered me. So eventually, like, it was like, okay, like, what's something that could do some of the same things that I wanted to do, but like, there's some kind of practical ideas, like, hey, why would it be, pretty wicked fast, and how could it target? I'm like, oh, it's like this like industrial mining thing that was, repurposed into like a ship for military application.
I
I was
love
like,
that.
oh,
That's one of my favorite boss ships, essentially, or vessels. I've always just loved the idea, and even the shape and the look and everything like that. Have always been super, super into sprite work, like especially boss designs in shmups. I find that's where you see a lot of the really just over the top, awesome ideas just coming out. And it was the same way, just kind of like this big claw in the sky, almost like just some sort of pincer with massive lasers. And one thing I actually really enjoy about that fight in particular is that when he's doing like spinning from one side to the other or whatever, there are times where it's safe to like cross over the beam. Even though it's a 2D game, it gives you this kind of 3D sense that you're in this 3D situation because you can just kind of like gauge the angle as he's turning. And even though you're technically touching it, it's like he's not actually in the foreground yet. And so it's kind of like a safe moment. So getting used to that was really interesting because I know that was another boss fight that I struggled with quite a bit when I first got into it because I was just like, okay, like how do I charge my stuff? Like at what situations can I really take advantage of while he's doing all these different things in the fight? And so that was really cool to me. But I think in general, all of the like it's mind blowing to me because in most shmups, you have a boss at either the top of the screen or the opposite side of the screen if it's a horizontal. And it's like, okay, you're just dealing with one type of attack pattern after another. With each and every boss in Risk System, I love the fact that it's this, like, it's a living, breathing experience. Like, there's all this learning that you need to do, and it's super engaging. It's never about just dodging bullets, it's about just learning, okay, how can I do this, that, what do I need to watch out for? And it's just, man, it was one of the more interesting shmups I played last year, that is for sure. I could just gush about it for hours, to be honest.
Could just put that into some capsules for me whenever I have a low energy
Yeah.
day. I can just I yeah I that was it's funny because like some of that stuff was just part of me being sort of pedantic and detailed
Hmm.
obsessed, where it was like, oh, like it wouldn't make sense if they only just like stayed exactly where Elise could always hit them. Like they're trying to kill her, so they
Yeah.
should probably move around.
Yeah, exactly.
And it was, and like and it was funny. Like some of these things are contrivances that are which you're like it's like there's decisions that are from the constraints of it being this like 2D game where you just had to like think around like, well, how can this make sense? And yeah, that whole 3D space thing, like trying to get that feeling too, like getting that laser rotation on Volsh was pretty it took some time, but like once it was there, it felt so right.
Yeah.
And then it that ended up that same sort of approach. Like I was trying to like measure like real space, like okay, like if they were this far away from you, like what would it look like?
Hmm.
So trying to do math to get it to like match up, like okay, like how small would they be? And it's funny because there's certain things that you'd think you just intuitively know, but then you're like, oh no, that's not right at all.
Yeah.
Like from like perspective, like the craziest thing I think, like one of the most difficult things artistically was the Trophium mode,
Hmm.
which unlocks after you beat the game once. Like, so the idea is that you're flying up this tower, but you're constantly sort of banking left. So you're going
Yeah.
around this thing, and I was like, okay, so it's a giant tower that's reaching up into space. And I'm like, okay, but the sun's only going to be on one side. So like it wouldn't make sense. So like if like you might not notice it when you're playing it, but you actually fly between the lit and the dark side of the tower, and you see the sun pass by in the background. And it's one of those weird things that the parallax works in the opposite direction when you're turning versus when you're going straight. Because when you're turning, things that are really far away actually fly away faster.
Hmm.
So I had to like I was like I think I'd put like an object in my living room, and I was like oh no, I was holding a stick. I had like a tennis ball on the end of it, and then I was like walking around like a like I don't know, it was like a baseball tee or like well like a little like kid softball tee thing.
Yeah.
And I'm like going around, I'm like, oh yeah, the thing in the furthest away like flies by faster. And then I was like trying to calculate like a rough estimate of like, okay, how far away is the sun?
Man.
Just to make it like yeah, I wanted that little dizzying feel to it. And it's funny, that mode is probably the most deliberately inspired by Burnout mode in the whole game. Like it's literally just Burnout when I
Nice.
think about it. The whole like time attack and time extension based on like defeating enemy waves. Like, oh yeah, that's just Burnout and Crazy Taxi. Like
I love it. I didn't actually jump into that mode too much. I think my main interest was just the regular run, but I do think about it sometimes, and it would be nice to get back into that and do some more of those sessions as well. I think we sort of touched on ideas that were left out or cut, because you mentioned that you just had all sorts of features and things and then realized that, okay, this actually doesn't serve the purpose. Were there any other main things, like let's say when you were further into the creation process, where you just had to make like a choice, like, okay, we actually have to remove this now because it just doesn't make sense with how everything else has shifted?
yeah, like yeah, as you touched upon, like yeah, the alt fire modes, those were I think those were out by 2018,
Okay.
or like early or late 2017.
Hmm.
Um, I think for the most part, there wasn't too much that was planned after that that had to be removed. I I know that there was an idea for another like DLC, because the Trifia mode wasn't there at launch. It was actually an updated feature, like when it came out 6 months after the regular game.
Okay.
It was just included in all of the subsequent console versions, like at the start.
Yeah.
But one of the ideas was there was going to be because Triphium is supposed to also function as kind of a sequel hook.
Hmm.
And the idea was we were going to do a sort of a remix mode of the game where you would be playing in the Triphium ship, and it would just be essentially like the VR missions of like documenting the first risk system, like sort of like historical event. So you'd get like alternate versions of the bosses, and
Cool.
there'd be sort of basic elements, like where like stages would look slightly different and things would be sort of incorrect because it was based on like speculation as to what happened.
Hmm.
So it was supposed to go into like a narrative idea about the idea of like how much of the original game ends up being covered up in the future, or like what kind of revisionist history takes place.
Yeah.
And like who was speculated to be the actual enemies or whatever. And but at that point it was like a thing where we're like, well, I don't know how many people are going to even get to play that, and that's literally like another game.
Yeah.
Like, on top. Like, it's sort of like the upside down castle thing in
Hmm.
Symphony of the Night or whatever, but it was just like, that's probably like, I think we can just make another game in the future instead of doing that.
Yeah, for sure. Which actually, I have a list of questions here, of course, and I don't really care about the order. So since we are on that topic of a future game, uh, what may or may not be in the works in terms of a risk system too?
So there is so the first prototype of Risk System 2 was made in like 2020-ish.
Okay,
Um, and the idea is like this one was just to sort of be the Terminator 2 to Risk Systems Terminator 1. And so ideas for that one were they're like stuff that we've been able to sort of get rolling is like, okay, so this one would be a co-op game. Like you could play with two players. Perspective shift would go from the side scrolling to overhead to accommodate it.
okay,
But then there'd be new so alt fires would return, but in a new context.
cool.
So the context of it being more of a you activate it, and there's a tiny delay between you activating the weapon and it firing, and as many shots as you buzz during the activation period determines the output of the special.
Cool.
So it's like a thing where like in a way it's kind of sort of fighting gamey, like where there's like command inputs sort of, but like there's three different ships. They all have like a base, they have their barrier breaker and then they have their alt fire mode. And the idea is that it can also work in concert with whoever player 2 is. So you can combine the effects of player 1's alt fire with player 2's barrier breaker or whatever. And the barrier breaker, instead of being a full screen, it would be like a partial or a good amount of the screen area, but you can increase the radius of its effect by combining with another player.
Amazing.
Yeah. So the whereas like the first game is about feeling sort of edge of your seat on this like prototype ship. This is like 300 some years in the future, and they've worked out most of that by that point. So it's more about already sort of being at that competence level. Being a little bit less scary to hardcore shmup fans.
Yeah.
Like and just being a general just sort of chaotic cacophony of just like blowing things up.
Love it. I'm all for that, seriously. What was the most fun part of the creation process for you?
I think it's when going to or seeing people's reactions honestly to like boss fights. That was, or like when like they would like seeing something click. I feel like one of the big drivers for me for even making games is getting those interactions at at conventions. It's because it's so different when you like see like when you're in the physical presence of other people that are like trying your thing, right? And like like you have an idea for how they're gonna react, and like when it does actually happen, you just like it's such a satisfying like fun thing. And like when someone gets like when they make really excited noises, like when someone goes like oh man, and you're like, yes, like that's what I want you to feel like. That's so great. like you're just is like or if it's like sort of passing on that experience that like other games allowed me to have growing up, and like just those like moments of excitement and just like seeing that in other people is this like really cool thing. Yeah, and like seeing like I think the Gorgon boss fight, like seeing people beat stage 4, like those are the happiest people on earth.
Yeah, no kidding.
They're just like the way that they'd react to like defeating her in like especially at like a convention setting.
Oh my god.
Just like
yeah, you don't need to remind me. That was oh man, I could not tell you how much cursing I went through just to figure out that fight. But when I finally did, I was like, oh my god, I know what to do now, and I'm not fiddling with this anymore. Like, I can just do it every time now. Screw this boss. Let's just get
It
at
was
the rest of the run.
and it was like and it was great because like part of what it like again like I'd be lying if I said I meant it to be that difficult. Like I didn't entirely grasp because like well, the thing about those later bosses is that I've already been playing my game for 2 years.
Yeah.
So I'm just like thinking I'm making a gift, like this is just increase in difficulty. Like I knew she was harder than stage three because originally I had them like originally Volsh was stage four and Chess was stage three,
Hmm.
but I just switched them because I realized like, oh well, Chess is more difficult. I didn't realize how much more
Yeah.
difficult, but yeah, like when like part of it is that like narratively like Chess and Elise didn't get along very well, so like Chess is a little bit more motivated to kill Elise than everyone else,
Yep.
and that's why she like is physically moving her ship. Like she's caught on enough that like oh okay, just shooting stuff at you isn't the best, so I'm gonna just ram you.
Yeah.
Like I'm bigger, I'm going to ram you. And the original version of that fight, she could one shot you with those rams.
Oh my god. You're a
Because
madman.
back then, yeah, back then I thought it just because it was like it made sense. Like, well, they're bigger than you, and that used to be a thing for the whole game. Was like if they're bigger than you and you run into them, you die.
Yeah.
And it was like it was just like oh, and I was just being very like, and then it was like a week after or 2 weeks after the game came out that people were like, that's awful. Like, please don't let that be. So then it was changed that like ramming is just like taking a physical like a regular shot,
Yeah.
which made that fight much more manageable. But I mean, I even eventually made there's if you play it on Xbox, the chess fight is actually Xbox and PC. The chess fight is considerably faster because
Oh, nice.
her patterns are actually slightly different.
Okay.
Um, One thing is that there's like a warning that telegraphs where she's dashing from,
Hmm.
and the second thing is that she has an extra attack, but the attack is actually another chance for you to buzz to get more barrier breakers in. So
Solid.
when she does the dashes, she'll now leave these little energy mines behind her, and you can just fly between the mines to like charge up another like an entire full breaker per phase.
Man.
And it was just like it felt like oh you're adding attacks, you're making her more difficult. And it's like no, you're getting more opportunities now to like just use your breaker on her.
Yeah.
So it's like the fight I think is like a good 45 seconds faster um,
Jeez, that is
in that
huge.
version.
That's
Yeah,
amazing.
yeah,
That's the kind of thing that, like, when you're getting used to it, you might not want that sort of thing. But for me, I went all in with that game. I played it for, I'm not sure, like a solid week. I didn't touch anything else. And when you kind of get to that point where you feel really proficient, that's a great time to have, like, let's say an additional mode where you can be one shotted by a boss in a situation like that. Or yeah, I feel like there's just something like people might be like, oh, it's too hard, like don't do that. But it's no, like actually do that, but maybe just make it an additional thing for the people who get so into the game that they really want to just lap up additional stuff they can do in the options settings or whatever the case is. So I think that's
oh yeah.
brilliant. Hearing that it's 45 seconds faster, that's like, holy smokes. Like, sign me up.
Oh, I have to interject real quick because when you're like really dedicated people, I have to mention there's a guy goes by his handle's Thunderblade.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so the first like all S rank like world record clear was like 2 days after the game came out by a guy Horihisto
Okay.
on YouTube, and like that was cool and unexpected. But then we I don't know if he reached out, this guy Thunderblade. He started posting videos of full combos for the stages where he could actually start the stage from beginning to end and get a full combo multiplier for the whole stage.
Oh my god.
And it was so great because and I guess to maybe explain to people who are listening,
Mm-hmm.
the scoring system in Risk System is pretty simple. The idea is that if you have like full shields, like whenever you destroy an enemy, it'll create these like shield shards that you can use to like recharge your health essentially. And if your health is already full, what it'll do is instead it'll increase your point multiplier. And so like these little shield shards like chase after you, like when you blow up enemies with your charge shots or barrier breaker. So what this guy did was he would consistently roll the entire time he was playing. He would outmaneuver the shield pickups. So he would have a giant wave of shield pickups just chasing him
God.
while he was destroying everything. And like and points where he couldn't, he would make sure to like link the destruction of an enemy because there's another thing that the more enemies you destroy consecutively in a small window of time will also increase your multiplier.
Mm-hmm.
And as long as you have active shield pickups, the multiplier doesn't turn off because I didn't want to rob anyone of any of the points that they'd earned.
Yeah.
Like it's like, oh, like if it was about to reach you and then your score went up before you got all your multipliers, and that would have been cheating them of their points.
Mm-hmm.
So he would maneuver through the stages, and you should watch him because actually stage 3 is just mind blowing.
Oh my god.
Like
Yeah.
the amount that his score goes up, like I was worried that I'm like, I don't know if there's going to be enough digits in the score counter to account for how many points this guy's getting.
Crazy.
But yeah, like it was like he was like his performance was just like so amazing, and that was so cool to see. So we actually ended up creating an enemy and naming it Thunderblade for the Trophium mode as like a little sort of like he has a mini boss named after him.
That's awesome.
Just because it was so that was so cool. But yeah, it's really fun to watch. Yeah, that stuff is just super rewarding.
Yeah, that's amazing. I would love to check that out. So I just have maybe one more question on my list. That's not to say we got to cut anything short here, depending on how long things go. But what would you say was the greatest takeaway from making Risk System in terms of like you learned something super valuable, or like you just know what to avoid for how you approach creating games going forward? What was the biggest takeaway for you?
Well, one thing would be that giving people or making like the thing that like when I knew that Risk System was working was when I at least got like when I made it like okay, like moving should have a feeling. Like
Mm-hmm.
moving should feel good. And like the lesson learned from there is that like any mechanic, like if you can make it feel good in isolation, then like you're already on the right track. Like if your basic movement like has this distinct or like a good feeling to it, or like if it feels like it has a rule set, like the smallest details, if you can get those to work like once they're in concert,
Mm-hmm.
that's going to be huge.
Yeah.
And like it'll make the game will kind of sort of make itself for you because you'll be like, okay, like what would be neat to experience using this system. And then the other thing is I guess would be letting people have victories often.
Yeah.
Is like the way that maybe I play games, like I realize that not everyone plays them that way, so that's sort of like
Mm-hmm.
an important thing for me to learn was that like I can be utterly defeated by something and I'm like, all right, cool, time to learn.
Yeah.
And that's not necessarily everyone.
Mm-hmm.
So just allowing for there to be all sorts of different forms of victory, and like letting emergent things happen, like seeing what kind of goals people set for themselves, and then like
Totally.
being like, okay, like how can I facilitate that?
Yeah.
And the other thing was just that like, uh, and this is just a product of those like showcasing the game in person with people, was just like listening to ideas, because as much as I want to take credit for auto fire, it was not my idea.
Hmm.
Not originally. It was actually brought up by my co-developer, whose name is also Chris. Uh, and just like I should sort of like um, say like, yeah, he does a lot of the other Chris Anderson does a lot of the like integration stuff, a lot of he's a much more experienced like developer than I am, so he helped make things possible, or like helped me understand more things and get better as a developer myself. And his daughter actually was playing the game, and she just said to us like, and this was just at the convention, at one of the conventions, like, is there any reason I wouldn't want to be firing? And we just like looked at each other and we're like, yeah, no, not really. It's like, so why am I pressing a button? And I was like, and I'm like, and it was like an on the spot thing where I was like, I took I think one of the laptops, and I was like, okay, wait, hold on. It's like I like wrote the thing to be like, all right, when you're within this certain range, like vertically, and like they've entered the screen, fire, and we're like, all right, let's just see. We're just gonna do this. And it was like this immediate thing, like we didn't plan for, and but we were just like, yep, nope, this is way better.
Oh yeah.
It's just so much better.
Yeah. And it's
um,
and it's so much more realistic. It's not that I need games, especially shmups, to be realistic, because I just love how wild and crazy everything is. But in this kind of situation where there is more of a personal connection with characters, like I found myself genuinely interested in what was going on and the people themselves. And when I think about, okay, she's flying in her ship, why would her ship just be constantly firing? Like, who does that? Even though, like, when you're playing any other game, like Bullet Hell, it's like you just hold down the button and you just have this huge wave of bullets, like the whole run, pretty much. So there was something really nice to just see that implemented, and hearing that story of how that came to be is just great.
yeah, I could. I'd love to be like, oh, I'm so smart. But it was just like, yeah, it was just like, it was just acting on like a really like, that was like a super legit observation.
Hmm.
Like, why do that? Like, because like, part of me, would, initially in my back of my head, oh, sorry about the dogs,
Yeah, no worries.
would, would, um, would make the argument like, oh no, but like there's the feeling of holding down the button, like you're doing something, but then it was like, but are you?
Yeah.
like if you're holding it down like the whole time. And yeah, it was just, being able to act on, people's sort of like suggestions, and not being too like, I don't know, precious about it.
Yeah.
Granted, I never listened about the inertia.
Yeah.
but it was but it was a thing where I was like come on, that's like just part of the rules of the game. Like, if you're playing soccer and someone just keeps being like, well, why can't I use my hands? It's like, well, you're not really playing soccer in good faith at that point.
Yeah, exactly.
Like, it's just a rule set. Like, this just has a different rule set. That's all it is. Like, it's not getting in your way. It's just that's how this game works.
Yeah, exactly.
That's it.
And that's the thing, like it's so important for people, because yeah, if like I would definitely encourage people to check this out, uh because it's just an incredible experience. But like, you can't go into it thinking that you're just going to be able to apply the same kind of mentality and approach that you do in other shooters, because it's its own beast, and it is just incredible. And yeah, that's pretty much all I can say on that for now.
Oh, yeah, and again, I want to point out that yeah, that video that you did, that's pretty incredible. That was one of the coolest things ever, actually. Um, Again, your attention to detail and everything, and just how much that you were able to just sort of intuit and understand. Like that was, I guess this is like another, addendum to a previous question about like coolest moments. And I was like,
Yeah.
yeah, that's definitely one of them that, like, made me feel like, they're like I do, I enjoy like long form, you know, game analysis content, and being like, oh, like someone thought it was worthy of that kind of analysis,
Hmm.
like very, which is very like emboldening for me, but like
Yeah.
just like a very like cool event where it was just like, I'm like sharing with people, like, check it out, oh my God, look at this, like, see, look at this. And it's like, and yeah, like it was really cool. And like, the last, with everything, globally that's
Hmm.
sort of gone on over the last few years, that was like a huge morale boost. And honestly, like part of seeing that was a big encouragement, because we're currently working on another project that, isn't Risk System 2, but like watching it just like it, like, reminded me of like, you know, it made me think of Risk System again in this, a different way, where I was like, okay, yeah, I think we are going to go forward with 2
Yeah,
actually.
for sure. It has to happen. Like
Yeah.
I will not accept anything else. Um, no, but like I'm glad you responded to it as positively, and that it could give you that sense of just being stoked and appreciating that someone would do that. For me, I almost never do that type of video unless it's just like one of the best things I've ever experienced. So videos like that are very few and far between, but my God, everything about Risk System was just like, I can't believe stage one has this music. I can't believe it looks this incredible. I can't believe, like, all these things. Like, it was just a nonstop week of insanity, just being so passionate about this game. It was just over the top exciting for me to dive in and here's the crazy thing too. Like, I appreciated it to a certain point and made certain observations, but when I then decide to buckle down and start writing things out, that's when it's like, okay, I got to go back into the stage and actually take the time to study things more and just be even more observant. And that's when tons just came flooding in, and I was noticing things that I just hadn't noticed before, and just making all these connections and just appreciating it 1,000 times more than when I just first started playing it. And so for me, that was a very, very special project to work on. I had a blast putting that video together.
Uh, yeah. I mean, oh. Man, is it dusty in here? I'm just
Yeah, we
I
just
think my video is not on.
um
Oh.
that being said, like yeah, I don't really think I have like anything else that I want to mention. Is there anything else that you feel you want to share with people listening, or are we pretty much done this time around?
Um, yeah, I mean, appreciate, people listening to our chat. And I guess if, with the sequel being in a very, early, with it, we have a game we're actively developing that's probably going to be done by next year. Um, but if anyone wants to share any thoughts on, if they've played the game, what they may have, wanted from it, or what they appreciated about it. If they wanted to like follow me on Twitter or send me anything, or like comments, or comments on this video, actually, yeah, that makes more sense. Comments on the video.
Yeah, agreed.
Any sort of like, that makes way more sense. Yeah, like put that down there. And I want to sort of take more, have this feedback going, like, because the cool thing about making the sequel is going to be that, like, I know what works, and
Hmm.
like I can, start on the best foot possible. And I think it would be nice for this, I like this second game is going to be admittedly more accessible than the first one, I think, in the
Okay.
same sense that T2 is more accessible than T1.
Yeah.
But like, people, any sort, that play the game, if they have either ideas or suggestions or other, thoughts they had or what, they would hope to see, like there's already like a story and everything written out, and like we're getting some of the same people back for certain things that are going to be happening. The vocalist that did the opening theme for the game, I reached out to her, and she'll be available to do the second game's theme as well. Like
Nice.
there's a lot of people that are happy to uh, you know get to work on this again, and yeah, I just love to share the process. Yeah,
Yeah.
cool.
Amazing. Yeah. I actually just remembered one more thing that I want to share, which was a huge highlight for me. And that's the fact that you don't just have visual attacks that you need to pay attention to. I love when things are targeting you and you need to listen, because there are some situations where there's a lot of stuff you need to be thinking about visually in terms of avoiding how to charge, when to charge, but you also need to pay attention to that as a like
Yeah.
you're getting closer and closer to that shot going off and it's targeting you. And I don't think I really ever see that in shmups. And that's a whole other layer of challenge and complexity. And I think that is a huge thing that is just incredible to experience. So that's kind of like my last thought, and yeah, everything on that. So
I
yeah,
like how you I like how you hit the tone of the targeting sound too. It was great. So knowing exactly what that is. Like, oh wow.
I think I just
Nice
have an
pitch.
ear for that kind of stuff or something. But yeah. Anyway,
Um,
I won't keep you any longer. But I really appreciate you setting aside some time to do this. I have had a blast chatting with you and just hearing more about the experiences you went through and all that kind of stuff. And I'm really trusting other people can check out the game too if they haven't yet, because it's unlike anything else I've ever played shmup wise. So yeah, thank you.
thanks for
Yeah, thank you
having
so
me.
much. Yeah, no worries. So yeah, for everybody who is watching, feel free to drop whatever you want in the comments. Let us know what you thought of this chat, or if you've played Risk System before, or maybe if I include some gameplay footage or something for this video, which I probably will. Then you can see what it's like and check it out yourself if you want to. But yeah, thank you again, everybody, for being here. Have an awesome day, and we will see you next time.